I grew up in the northwest corner of the state of Washington, and the land of rivers and mountains and trout and salmon and sailing, and of course enjoyed all the outdoor things that a young boy would enjoy, being in that world, camping with his parents and playing in the rivers and catching trout on opening day of trout season. I was introduced to the backcountry really early in my life, and that later developed into a lifetime of climbing and mountaineering and whitewater rafting even. When I was in fourth grade, though, we moved for the first time. Fifth grade was a move, sixth grade was a move, and that continued all the way up until I was a senior in high school. I experienced La Grande, Oregon, and Roanoke, Virginia, Yokohama, Japan, and Marysville, Washington, and probably a couple other places in between that I can't recall right now. That being a new kid in school impacted me a lot. I always had to earn my way, fight my way into the system with who the players were in the room. Athletics were particularly difficult. I was small. My folks put me in school young, and I developed a little later anyway, so that made me the small kid around, so I had to compensate for that. I grew up in the church, and as a little boy, a couple things I remember. I remember shouting about 2/3 of the way through the message. The pastors in the late 50s, early 60s sort of had a formula where they'd ramp up, and the result was I got scared. I'm a little boy, and they're up there on the podium, and they're bigger than me, and then the shaming starts and the guilt making starts, and it got to the point where I was afraid at church. That was my experience of as a child. I was just scared. Combine that with being a new kid in school so often because of my dad's career. We followed him around doing what he did so well, and so I would be a new kid in school too, and that usually meant being afraid, at least for the first few weeks or even months. I was small, and so I got tested a lot. So fear at church and fear at school, and then some of my father's issues and that were unresolved from his father, who probably had unresolved issues from his father, and so on. But they resulted in I got some pretty severe beatings as a kid, even to the point where I would lose bladder control. And that took me years to be able to talk about, and to be able to really appreciate my dad and see it as something more than a beating. But when his rage would get out of control, it got pretty rough. So afraid at home, afraid at church, and afraid at school. The result for me was stomach ulcers when I was 14 years old. That was a particularly hard time in my life. I was a young athlete, and I missed a lot of school because of that, and I felt somehow different from the other kids. So add the stomach ulcer situation onto already being a new kid and feeling guilty constantly from the church messages I got that I was never enough, or I wasn't given enough or doing enough, and never feeling like always feeling sort of like when's the next beating going to happen at home. And I lived with a lot of fear. I think that impacted me a lot, and I think that impacts my story now a lot. So I end up in Bible school out on the West Coast, and wasn't really sure about what career path I could take, and I had a friend's brother who went to a Bible school, so off I went. And I felt like it was a calling, and it was a great year. Well, all the spiritual guys in the dorm, they would get up at 5 or 5:30, and they were, of course, being super spiritual, didn't want to wake up their roommates, so they would go sit in the hall and do their devotions, as you will. So I decided that I would be a part of the super spiritual group too, the varsity team, and I would get up in the morning and I'd go out in the hall and do my devotions too. Yeah, I think there was something inside of me that thought, if I do these, then God will be more pleased with me, or I'll be more pleased with myself. If I can do this spiritual activity, then somehow that's going to affirm me, and and I'll be more whole of a person, trying to be the guy I should become. And what would happen to me is I would usually fall asleep in the hall, and I'd wake up with a jolt and look down at the other spiritual guys doing their thing and wonder if they'd seen me failing in my super spiritual activity. It just wasn't me. It wasn't the kind of personality or temperament that I had, but I didn't know that then. So again, I feel not enough. I feel like I can't measure up, and I feel like somehow the life of being the church leader that I hope to be is just really going to be doomed, or I'm going to live as a poser or a pretender and posturing for the rest of my life. And so my vocation was with a regional youth ministry that combined my love of the outdoors, mountaineering, rock climbing, and whitewater rafting, with my heart for high school kids. I had been deeply impacted as a high school student by a youth pastor during that period when I was in the hospital. And I think he really changed my life as he introduced me to grace and forgiveness of Jesus. And I wanted to offer that back to other high school students. And if I can help you in any way, I'd love to come speak for your men's group, your retreat, your men's breakfast, your conference, or even women's retreats. I've done a number of those as well, if you can believe that. Thanks for watching.